Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Srimati Bhakti Vedanta Swami Niti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pacharne Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pastya Chade Chatarne Sri Krishna Chaitanya Pramanityananda Shri Advaita Gadadha Shivasani Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Vanchakapatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Paditanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavad Gita Ki Jai. So yes, devotees, on Tuesday night, was it Tuesday night? Anyway, last time we were together, we started the 5th chapter. Just made a slow start, actually. We only read through 4 verses. But it's important, sometimes we have to focus on things and just go a little more deeply into certain points. So, all right. Let's start then. So, I can just inform you, actually, seeing we're all here and it's just the beginning. One thing we're going to do is next week we finish the first 6 chapters, which is the first third of the book. And what we're going to do is on the last day, the Friday next week, we are going to have questions and answers. And it's very likely, if we can finish the 6th chapter by Wednesday night, which, we'll have to go a little, but it's not impossible, then we may have 2 nights of questions and answers. But definitely we'll at least have 1, so you can start thinking about it and maybe start sending in your questions to Premagni Devi Dasi, I assume. Actually, I'm not sure who, but we'll let you know who. We've still got time. We've still got some time. Okay, so at least, of course, we'll only have an hour, or maybe we'll take a little extra time, have an hour and a half, something like that. So we'll just, and seeing there's a lot of us, there's well over 600 of us, as far as I know, even maybe more than 700. So if everyone gives 1 question, it'll take, too long. But if you can send your questions in, as I said, we'll have to tell you to whom, then we can sort through and see which are the most important, you could say, or most sort of frequently asked, something like that. All right, so here we are now, chapter 5. We're in the first section, which is about how Nishkam Karma Yoga is equal to, but easier than, renouncing work, just plain renunciation. So yes, we read verse 4. Let's go into verse 5. Actually, let me just read verses 5 and 6, because the section finishes with verse 6, just so we've got a little idea of the whole subject matter that we're going to look at first of all in this section. So verse 5 says, one who knows that the position reached by means of analytical study, or Sankhya, or jnana, or renunciation, sannyas. These are all basically, it's just one umbrella of understanding with these different titles, but it's just referring to the same process, which is the process which Arjuna asked about right in the first verse of the chapter. Okay. Anyway, so one who knows that the position reached by means of analytical study can also be attained by devotional service, and who therefore sees analytical study and devotional service to be on the same level, sees things as they are. And verse 6, merely renouncing all activities, yet not engaging in the devotional service of the Lord, cannot make one happy. But a thoughtful person engaged in devotional service can achieve the supreme without delay. Well, we see in these two verses how Lord Krishna is emphasizing devotional service 3 times, I think 4 times actually. 4 times he mentions devotional service in these 2 verses. So, yes, Prabhupada's really trying to impress upon us this idea of how important is devotional service. So, let's just have a look here then, verse 5. One who knows that the position reached by means of analytical study can also be attained by devotional service, and who therefore sees analytical study and devotional service to be on the same level, sees things as they are. So Srila Prabhupada explains in the purport that by Sankhya research, that cultivation of knowledge in a renounced position, one will conclude that we're not part of the material world, but we're part of the spiritual reality or the spiritual whole, and therefore we mustn't become entangled materially. But actually we must work in relation to the Supreme. Yes. So then Prabhupada really sort of delineates the point which we mentioned in the last session, that Sankhya means to become detached from matter, and devotional service means to then become attached to devotional service in Krishna consciousness. So they're one sort of, or at least they're linked very closely. As we discussed really the other day, well, there is a type of continuum between the two. It means, first of all, if you do Sankhya Yoga, you analyze, you understand, yes, spirituality, that's the thing. Not to be attached to material life, we must renounce for the sake of the truth. But then that person may realize that actually the truth is the absolute truth, is Krishna, and therefore start engaging in devotional service. So it's like one, if done properly, leads to the other in just a natural flow. So in that sense, they can be said to be one. But otherwise, in a more absolute sense, there are important differences. Yes, so right at the end, Prabhupada says, end of the purport, detachment from matter and attachment to Krishna are one and the same. One who can see this sees things as they are. Now, of course, for the Mayavadis or impersonalists, who are really trying to become detached from matter, it's not really that they become attached to Krishna, but at least if one is more educated spiritually, if one is more educated in Krishna consciousness particularly, then detachment from matter and attachment to Krishna, they'll just occur at the same time. But actually the attachment to Krishna is the thing which allows the detachment from matter to happen. Otherwise, without the attachment to Krishna, it's going to be a battle to become detached from matter. And we talked about that also the other day, how Lord Brahma, offering prayers to Lord Krishna in the prison house of Kamsa, spoke that verse about the impersonalists, patantyada, they fall back down. Yeah. All right, so number 6, merely renouncing all activities, yet not engaging in the devotional service of the Lord, cannot make one happy. But a thoughtful person engaged in devotional service can achieve the supreme without delay. So that's a bit more emphatic, that if you try to renounce but you don't engage in devotional service, you won't be happy. Prabhupada talks about it in the purport. There are 2 types of sannyasis, the Mayavadis and the Vaishnavas. The Vaishnavas study Srimad Bhagavatam and other literatures. The Mayavadis study Vedanta Sutra. The Vaishnavas are engaged in devotional service, which engage their bodies and minds. But the Mayavadis, they don't have a program. All they do is tediously study and speculate. Tedious meaning it's sort of painful and it's just not inspiring at all. Hard work. Yes, so that's what they do. They study, they speculate. Sometimes, Prabhupada says, sometimes they study Srimad Bhagavatam, but because they're Mayavadis, they're prone to doing it improperly, and so it becomes tedious also. It becomes just, in the jargon of my youth, in the jargon of my youth, it becomes a drag. So then, what often happens is, because they're not getting taste from their study, their just dry renunciation, they fall back into philanthropic work, which is just materialistic. So as Prabhupada explains here, the Vaishnavas are definitely better situated. That was the point. That was one of the points. Better, it's easier, and because it's better, it's easier, and because it's easier, it's better, like that. And otherwise it's difficult. So the last sentence Prabhupada says in the purport, therefore the conclusion is that those who are engaged in Krishna conscious activities are better situated than the sannyasis engaged in simple speculation about what is Brahman and what is not Brahman, although they too come to Krishna consciousness after many births. I mean, they may do. Prabhupada mentions they may come to Krishna consciousness after many births. To be quite honest, they also may not, particularly in the current age. So in a class on some of these verses right here, Srila Prabhupada says, so, sannyasas tu mahabaho, if artificially I detach myself and renounce this world. He's quoting from this verse, number 6. So if artificially I detach myself and renounce this world, then Krishna says, dukkham aptum ayogata. If there is no engagement, good engagement, better engagement, I mean, it's very interesting. Krishna uses the word dukkham, which of course means miserable. Yeah, talk about not being happy. They're actually miserable. So if there's no engagement, good engagement, better engagement, then it's a cause of misery. It's very difficult. If a family man renounces the family connection and does not make a better attachment, then he will feel that he was better off in family life and that he has made a big mistake. Krishna says, sannyasas tu mahabaho, dukkham aptum ayogata. Ayogata means if we have no link with Krishna consciousness, then detachment will cause us great misery. Yoga, of course, means connection or link, ultimately with Krishna. And ayoga means without a connection. Dukkham, it's miserable. Okay, so we move on to the second section, which is from verse 7 to verse 12, which is discussing working with detachment, the performance of nishkam karma yoga, detached work. Because it's detached, therefore it's called nishkam, without that desire for enjoyment, material enjoyment. So it's nishkam karma yoga, not sakam karma yoga, which would mean working in an attached way. So, yes, from verse 7 to verse 12, but there are two sections. There are 2 sections. First section is from 7 to 9, and then second section from 10 to 12. And here's a general comment for you. This is a general comment. It is important. And it's about the difference, the way things develop between chapter 3 and chapter 5. Not really touching on chapter 4 so much, but specifically chapter 3, chapter 5, because they're both titled Karma Yoga, where although 5 is Karma Yoga action in Krishna consciousness, action in devotional service. So Krishna, having given his recommendation on what is the best process, Krishna is now going to describe it. You know, Krishna has just, from verse 1 to verse 6, he's just made it clear that karma yoga or devotional service, working in a detached spirit for the Lord, is the best process. So now he's going to describe it. And he describes it in terms of a person who is quite advanced in the practice. There's a distinct difference between the description we find here in chapter 5 and the description found in chapter 3. As chapter 3 is more just establishing the principle of karma yoga as being a good principle and recommending that we practice it through arguments like if we don't practice it, if we don't act in karma yoga, then we're going to be forced to act. So that's the idea. You got to do karma yoga or devotional service. Yeah. That, you've got to set a good example also. You should do karma yoga to set a good example for the ignorant people. It'll help you avoid lust if you regulate your senses by acting in regular ways, which are spiritualized ways. Then you can avoid lust. But now, this chapter 5 is talking about the practice and the results of advanced karma yoga or devotional service, bhakti yoga, devotional service. Okay, so like we said, 7 to 9 are a subsection here, and what's being discussed is that a pure person, a pure soul, doesn't become entangled, because even though he's working, he fixes his mind on the Lord, on Krishna. And in doing this, he sees, he knows that his body is basically functioning automatically, like a machine. So let us read these 3 verses, 7, 8, and 9, and then we'll go through them in more detail. So, 7, one who works in devotion, who is a pure soul, and who controls his mind and senses, is dear to everyone, and everyone is dear to him. Though always working, such a man is never entangled. And then 8 and 9 are together. Are they together? Yes, 8 and 9 are together. A person in the divine consciousness, although engaged in seeing, hearing, touching, smelling, eating, moving about, sleeping and breathing, always knows within himself that he actually does nothing at all. Because while speaking, evacuating, receiving or opening or closing his eyes, he always knows that only the material senses are engaged with their objects, and that he is aloof from them. Okay? So, this is the idea. This is an advanced person, who's very advanced, karma yogi or devotee, yes, who's really engaged, actively working, but in a detached spirit of offering everything to Krishna. Okay, so verse 7, one who works in devotion, who's a pure soul, and who controls his mind and senses, is dear to everyone, and everyone's dear to him. Though always working, such a man is never entangled. Well, there's a couple of points, 2 or 3 points. 3 points. That the devotee or karma yogi is dear to everyone. Well, okay, that he's dear to everyone, everyone's dear to him. So that's 1 point. So there are 2 points. He's dear to everyone, everyone's dear to him. And even though he's always working, he's always active, he's never entangled, which includes he's never getting any reactions, karmic reactions, either bad or good, for the work or activity or service that he's doing. So Prabhupada explains in the purport, how is this person dear to everyone? Because he sees everyone as part and parcel of Krishna and helps them in Krishna consciousness. In this way, what he's doing, it's like, Prabhupada explains, watering the root of a tree or supplying food to the stomach. If you water the root of the tree, then the whole tree will sort of be pleased with you. Anyway, you will help the whole tree. And if you supply food to the stomach, the whole body will be pleased and satisfied. So similarly, there's this principle, just like it's said about the 6 Goswamis, Dhira adhira jana priyo priyakaro. Dhira means the sober people. Adhira means the not sober people, or just, the sort of the ruffians, the low class people. Dhira adhira jana, people, priyo priyakaro. They were dear to all of them. So it happens like that. Of course, some of the adhiras, some of the people who are not sober, some of the low-class people, the devotees are not dear to them. They regard the devotees as being sort of a challenge, but there's definitely many examples of people like Jagai and Madai. Initially, Lord Caitanya, Lord Nityananda was not dear to them, but then because of his wonderful qualities, he became dear to them. Yes, but in principle it's like that, or it can be like that because the devotee who's very pure and self-controlled, because the devotee's like that and is doing things for the benefit of the people, so many people like him, and he's very fond of the people, understanding they're all spirit souls. Yes, and so he's never offensive. Prabhupada makes this point. Because his senses are controlled and his mind is controlled, therefore his senses are controlled. Therefore he's never offensive. And Srila Prabhupada in the purport raises the point that, well, if Arjuna was inoffensive, why did he take part in the battle? And Prabhupada gives the answer. It wasn't offense. He was just helping them change their bodies under Krishna's order. And then let's just read the last little sentence, which kind of sums things up. Therefore Arjuna, while fighting on the battlefield of Kurukshetra, was not really fighting at all. He was simply carrying out the orders of Krishna in full Krishna consciousness. Such a person is never entangled in the reactions of work. Right. Never entangled. Of course, that was the concluding point in that verse, that the person who's doing like this is never entangled, which takes us on to verses 8 and 9. A person in the divine consciousness, although engaged in seeing, hearing, touching, smelling, eating, moving about, sleeping, and breathing, always knows within himself that he actually does nothing at all, because while speaking, evacuating, receiving or opening or closing his eyes, he always knows that only the material senses are engaged with their objects and that he is aloof from them. This reminds us of chapter 3, verse 27. The spirit soul, bewildered by the influence of false ego, thinks himself the doer of activities that are in actuality carried out by the 3 modes of material nature. You may remember when we read this verse some number of days ago, then we demonstrated that here's my arm. Well, which arm? This one, everyone can see better. So here it is. And now it's down. But look, here it goes, it's going up. Oh, and it's going right up, way up. Yeah. So according to what Lord Krishna is saying in verses 8 and 9, and in verse 27 from chapter 3 from before, a person who's doing like this, raising their arm, they think, oh, I'm raising my arm. But according to what's being stated here, it is just the modes of material nature who are carrying it out. And what am I doing? I'm desiring. I'm desiring, and then by the arrangement of the super soul, the modes of material nature are carrying out the action. Right. So in the first sentence of the purport, Prabhupada says, a person in Krishna consciousness is pure in his existence, and consequently has nothing to do with any work which depends upon 5 immediate and remote causes. Shri Shri Radha Radhanath Shri Giri Govardhan Shri Caitanya Mahaprabhu Ki Jai. The curtain's just closed. So 5 remote causes: the doer, the work, the situation, the endeavor, and fortune. Anyway, these things are going to be discussed later on. 5 factors of action. And this devotee is in love with Krishna and is always serving in love, just engaging the senses, etc., in Krishna's service. So Srila Prabhupada makes a comment in a class on these verses. Prabhupada says, in this state, Krishna says, Naiva kinchit karomiti yukto manyeta tattvavet. I'm not doing anything. A Krishna conscious person does not think that he is accomplishing a lot. Ask him if he's going to a certain place, even when it's already agreed that he's going. Ask him, when are you going? And he'll say, I do not know when I shall go, but when Krishna asks me or allows me to go, then I shall go. So Prabhupada says, I'm saying this from my own practical experience of my Guru Maharaj, my spiritual master. He would never say, I am going, I am doing, but he would say, if Krishna desires, then I shall do it. If Krishna desires, then I shall go. He always depended on Krishna. This is called Vishuddhatma. Tattvavit means one who knows the truth. The truth is that I shall only go when Krishna allows me to go. This applies to us. You all are only studying Bhagavad Gita because Krishna is allowing you to. There are others who are not studying because Krishna maybe felt they weren't ready or whatever. But you have been given the special mercy of being allowed to study Bhagavad Gita in depth. And I've been given special mercy to sort of teach it, so to speak. And I would not have expected, I was traveling the world, really overdoing it. I never expected I'd be doing this course. But I am, because Krishna is allowing it. All right, so let's go on to the second section, verses 10, 11, and 12, second subsection. And the idea is that one who does his duty in this way for Krishna becomes peaceful, whereas those who are trying to enjoy the fruits of their work become entangled and not peaceful. So let's read these 3 verses as usual. One who performs his duty without attachment surrendering the results unto the Supreme Lord, is unaffected by sinful action, as the lotus leaf is untouched by water. That was 10, of course. And verse 11, the yogis, abandoning attachment, act with body, mind, intelligence, and even with the senses, only for the purpose of purification. 12, the steadily devoted soul attains unadulterated peace because he offers the result of all activities to me, whereas a person who is not in union with the divine, who is greedy for the fruits of his labor, becomes entangled. So there you go, devotees. So let's go through in a bit of detail. Verse 10, one who performs his duty without attachment, surrendering the results unto the Supreme Lord, is unaffected by sinful action, as the lotus leaf is untouched by water. This lotus leaf being untouched by water, it's a famous example. You may well have heard of it before, that the lotus is there in the pond or the lake, whatever, right in the middle of it. And it looks like the lotus leaf is just floating on the water. But actually, at least elsewhere, Prabhupada explains that the lotus leaf, there's a special coating on the bottom of, like a waxy coating or something, on the bottom of the lotus leaf. And that's what is touching the water. The actual leaf is not contacting the water, even though it looks like it, but it's not actually contacting the water. So similarly, a devotee or a karma yogi, who is surrendering results to the Supreme Lord, is untouched by sinful actions or reactions, because there's a special coating, you could say, protecting him, separating him from the actions and the reactions. That special coating is the surrender, without attachment, just offering the results to the Lord completely. Not like one for you, one for me, another one for you, another one for me. Wholeheartedly, wholly and solely, surrendering the results to the Supreme Lord. That protects the devotee or the karma yogi from the actions and the reactions. Yes, so well, Prabhupada first of all quotes some verses, right, which show that everything in this world is manifest from Brahman. Everything is manifest. In the Bhagavad Gita, Mama Yonya Mahad Brahma indicate that everything in the material world is a manifestation of Brahman. And although the effects are differently manifest, they're non-different from the cause, means Brahman. Okay, anyway. And Krishna is the supreme Brahman, Prabhupada explains. So everything belongs to him. And anyone who knows that everything belongs to Krishna is detached from those things and their activities and the results, and just engages everything in Krishna's service. It's, in principle, a very simple process. In this way, they're completely untouched by Maya. It applies to his body also. This is why the great devotees like Srila Prabhupada, when he left his body was not burnt, it was buried, because the understanding is it was untouched by Maya. It was a spiritual body, pure spiritual body. Yes, and Prabhupada makes the point that this fulfills Bhagavad Gita chapter 3, verse 30, which said, Mayi sarvani karmani sanyasya. Resign all your works unto me, Krishna. Mayi, meaning to me. And Prabhupada concludes the purport. The conclusion is that a person without Krishna consciousness acts according to the concept of the material body and senses. But a person in Krishna consciousness acts according to the knowledge that the body is the property of Krishna and should therefore be engaged in the service of Krishna. Yes. In other words, a position of being untouched by Maya. So here's another statement of Prabhupada's on these verses. The example is given here of the leaf of the lotus flower, which although it is in the water, has no connection with the water. Not a drop of water will stay there, although it is in the huge mass of water. Waves are going over it, and the water is always moving. But that particular leaf of the lotus flower has no connection with the water. Similarly, with all upheavals of this material world, one who is Krishna conscious is oblivious to such disturbances. Oblivious means they just don't register. Not like, he's not attached, not affected, but he's just not even aware. That's oblivious. Vishvam Purnam Sukhayate. Everyone is afflicted. Everyone's struggling, suffering. But a man who's in Krishna consciousness will not be affected. And verse 11. The yogis, abandoning attachment, act with body, mind, intelligence, and even with the senses, only for the purpose of purification. So Prabhupada points out, as he has done so many times already, and he will do more times further as we go further in Bhagavad Gita, that when one serves Krishna, one's actions are purified of material contamination. So there's no reactions. And this type of activity is called sadachar, eternal activity, pure spiritual activity. This is the idea. Yes, sadachar. And Prabhupada quotes verse from Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, Iha yasya haredase karamana manasa gira nikilas vapyavastasu jivan muktasu uchate. A person acting in Krishna consciousness, or in other words, in the service of Krishna, with his body, mind, intelligence, and words, is a liberated person even within the material world, although he may be engaged in many so-called material activities. So there's no false ego, because he knows he's not the body. And thinking you're the body is the basis of false ego. That devotee in Krishna consciousness knows he belongs to Krishna, and everything that is there is Krishna's. And Prabhupada says he is one with Krishna and is devoid of false ego, of the false ego that leads one to believe that he is the body, etc. This is the perfect stage of Krishna consciousness. And verse 12, the steadily devoted soul attains unadulterated peace because he offers the result of all activities to me. Whereas a person who's not in union with the divine, who's greedy for the fruits of his labor, becomes entangled. And Prabhupada says, the difference between a person in Krishna consciousness and a person in bodily consciousness is that the former, the devotee in Krishna consciousness, is attached to Krishna, whereas the latter is attached to the results of his activities. Therefore, the devotees are liberated. And the Srimad Bhagavatam says the cause of anxiety is one's functioning in duality without knowledge of Krishna. Yes. There's a verse. Let me just tell you, there's a line from a verse, or a couple of lines. Well, how does it go? Bayam dvitiya vinaveshata syat. Fear arises out of taking shelter of a second. You know what? Well, anything other than Krishna. Krishna is the first, everything else is the second, whatever it is. So when you take shelter of anything other than Krishna, fear comes. But the devotee is always taking shelter of Krishna, as the verse is pointing out, steadily devoted, offering the result of all activities, means he or she is in union with the divine, like this. So the devotee is liberated. The devotee is liberated. There's no duality. Everything is Krishna's energy. Everything is used in Krishna's service. Krishna controls the results. It's just absolute. There's no material effect. And therefore the devotee is always peaceful. But Prabhupada sums up, but one who's entangled in profit calculation for sense gratification cannot have that peace. This is the secret of Krishna consciousness realization, that there's no existence besides Krishna, which is the platform of peace and fearlessness. The only existence, there's no existence other than Krishna, which provides peace and fearlessness. Hare Krishna. So we are just going to continue on and do the next section. It's only 3 verses. It's the third section. It's from verse 13. Oh, it's 4 verses then. It's verses 13, 14, 15, and 16. We call it enlightenment through knowing the 3 doers in perspective: the soul, material nature, and the super soul. Yeah, in perspective, getting an understanding of them in perspective. You know, what is the position of what? Where do these 3 stand, and what are their relationships with each other? So the point, which was there in 8 and 9, about the devotee knowing that the activities of the body were just going on under the material nature, this is going to be revisited here, as well as an elaboration on the point about who is doing, who is the doer, as the little section title suggests. All right, so let us read the 4 verses first of all. When the embodied living being controls his nature and mentally renounces all actions, he resides happily in the city of 9 gates, the material body, neither working nor causing work to be done. Means it's a devotee whose activities are beyond the laws of karma, beyond material existence. So therefore, even though he's active, he's inactive. And he's not causing activity to happen. We remember that discussion, I'm sure. Oh, well, yeah, okay. Then verse 14. The embodied spirit, master of the city of his body, does not create activities, nor does he induce people to act, nor does he create the fruits of action. All this is enacted by the modes of material nature. So, yeah, that we've already had some discussion on the other day in chapter 3 and just earlier right now. 15. Nor does the Supreme Lord assume anyone's sinful or pious activities. Embodied beings, however, are bewildered because of the ignorance which covers their real knowledge. And verse 16, when, however, one is enlightened with the knowledge by which nescience is destroyed, then his knowledge reveals everything, as the sun lights up everything in the daytime. Wow, powerful verses, really. So let's go through them. When the embodied living being controls his nature and mentally renounces all actions, in other words, detached, in Krishna consciousness, he resides happily in the city of 9 gates, the material body, neither working nor causing work to be done, as we mentioned. That's the point about seeing in action within action. You see someone acting, they're active. But because you understand what is Krishna consciousness, you understand this person materially is totally inactive. Yes, so Prabhupada makes the point in the purport that the soul, we can go beyond the bodily conditions. He says the soul can do this if he so desires. In other words, it's up to us. We have to make the decision to engage in devotional service. And if we do that, if we're desiring like that, then we'll go beyond the bodily condition and we'll become aloof from the body and from material existence in general. So in other words, when we engage in devotional service, we immediately become aloof from the body, and then we live happily in the city of 9 gates. And Srila Prabhupada quotes Shvetashvata Upanishad in regards to these 9 gates, because it's probably a good idea to know what they are. The Supreme Personality of Godhead, who's living within the body of a living entity, is the controller of all living entities all over the universe. The body consists of 9 gates, 2 eyes, 2 nostrils, 2 ears, 1 mouth, the anus and the genitals. The living entity in his conditioned stage identifies himself with the body, but when he identifies himself with the Lord within himself, he becomes just as free as the Lord, even while in the body. Wow, that's amazing. 14. The embodied spirit, master of the city of his body, does not create activities, nor does he induce people to act, nor does he create the fruits of action. All this is enacted by the modes of material nature. Well, yeah, that's chapter 3, verse 27 again, in different, slightly different guise. Prabhupada says at the beginning of the purport, the living entity, as will be explained in the 7th chapter, is one of the energies or natures of the Supreme Lord, but is distinct from matter, which is another nature called inferior of the Lord. Somehow, the superior nature, the living entity, has been in contact with material nature since time immemorial. Yes, and getting all the reactions too, based on ignorance. But the soul doesn't. There are three things specifically mentioned. Doesn't create activities, doesn't induce others to act, and doesn't create the fruits or the results of action. This is all going on by the material nature, under the supervision of the Lord. And therefore we must be aloof through being in Krishna consciousness. Prabhupada says at the end of the purport, his best solution is to get out of the water of the ocean of material life by transcendental Krishna consciousness. That alone will save him from all turmoil. 15. Nor does the Supreme Lord assume anyone's sinful or pious activities. Embodied beings, however, are bewildered because of the ignorance which covers their real knowledge. Now, so this is an important point. It is. What Prabhupada means, it might be a little tricky to understand. Nor does the Supreme Lord assume anyone's sinful or pious activities. Means the Supreme Lord does not assume responsibility for anyone's sinful or pious activities. The activities are going on by the process of material nature under the supervision of the Lord, but on the basis of the desire of the conditioned soul. Therefore, even though the Lord and his energies are involved in the process of action, for which there are reactions, but he's not responsible. He doesn't have to take any reaction. It's not his fault. It is our fault because we desire it. It's our fault because we desire it. So that's the principle there. Even though man proposes and God disposes, so God sees things get done. But because man proposes, man's responsible. And 16, what a nice verse. When, however, one is enlightened with the knowledge by which nescience is destroyed, then his knowledge reveals everything, as the sun lights up everything in the daytime. So therefore, the devotees who are enlightened, they're not bewildered, whereas the non-devotees are always bewildered. And this knowledge, of course, it's Krishna conscious knowledge, the root of which is what? Do you remember? Janma karma chame divyam, evam yo veti tattvataha. We have to understand the position of Krishna, his appearance and activities. Yes, that's real knowledge. And on that basis, the devotees are not bewildered. And other knowledge which develops from that knowledge, yes, that's also Krishna conscious knowledge. So, in order to do this, one needs the guidance of a spiritual master. And then it's like the difference between night and day, day and night. Shri Shri Radha Radhanath, Shri Giri Govardhan, Shri Caitanya Mahaprabhu Ki Jai. And devotees, just stay with us for 1 minute, and we'll conclude. Srila Rupa Goswami, it's not here, but elsewhere he says a nice thing in this regard. He says, in your presence, means the Lord's, in your presence, which is just which is just like brilliant sunshine. I'm as insignificant as the light of a glowworm. It is even impudent for me to open my mouth before you. Hare Krishna. It's true. Yeah. The Lord lights up everything, just like the sun lights up everything in the daytime. And the knowledge about him and the knowledge he gives lights up everything, just like the sun lights up everything in the daytime, as compared to the light of a glowworm at night, which gives off a little light, but it, compared to the light of the sun in the day, it's just nothing. It's just some funny little flickering thing, not to be taken very seriously. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai.